12 years a slave when Solomon finally realized that he'd been freed from slavery and that his nightmare was finally over? While that was great for Solomon, for black people in the U.S., slavery actually never ended. For black people in the United States, it's more like 400 years and counting a slave. Most people think that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in America, but that's not true. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery and involuntary servitude except as punishment of incarcerated persons. It allows state and federal prisons to use prison labor for profit. This exception has negatively and disproportionately affected black people and continues to drive the criminalization of black communities. Black people are incarcerated in state prisons at nearly 5 times the rate of white Americans. In 12 states, more than half of the prison population is black. In Illinois, it's one of those states. And that's despite the fact that black people are only 14% of the population. Slavery has existed in 3 eras in the U.S. The first was black chattel slavery. The second era was with Reconstruction in 1868, with black codes and convict leasing. During this period, black people were arrested for petty crimes and sold back into slavery. The third was mass incarceration, which began in the early 1970s. That is what we're in right now. I can tell you that this is by design. It is not a mistake that prison labor as slavery was kept in the 13th Amendment. When the 13th Amendment was being debated in 1863, the U.S. Senate had an opportunity to abolish slavery in all forms and create real equality. This was quickly rejected by senators from the South because they needed to ensure that there was a way to continue to enslave black people for cheap labor. So they came up with slavery as a punishment for crimes. There are over 1.2 million people in prison today, and over 2/3 of them are workers in the prisons. The moment a person enters prison, they lose their right to refuse work. They lose their right to say no to forced labor, just like during slavery. Incarcerated people produce more than $2 billion a year in goods and in commodities, and over $9 billion a year in services for the maintenance of the prisons. The profits of private prisons are so lucrative that the companies who own them are publicly traded. Most stocks in 401ks and IRAs and in pension funds and private wealth management portfolios all contain stocks from private prison companies. And when you think about this, it makes sense for them to do this. Prison companies are safe bets. They're inflation-proof, they're stable, almost guaranteed profits and projected growth well into the future. All because this country is committed to locking up as many black and brown people as possible to fill the prisons. Let me give you another example of just how committed this country is to private prisons and the wealth they create off of black bodies. So towards the end of the Obama administration, the Justice Department said that the federal government was going to reduce and end its use of private prisons. On this news, the stock prices of private prison companies fell. When Donald Trump took office in January 2017, one of the first orders of business was to end that policy. As soon as it was announced, stock prices of private prisons went roaring back. Some of the biggest companies have benefited from prison labor at some point. They include Whole Foods, McDonald's, Walmart, Victoria's Secret, AT&T, Bank of America, Caterpillar, Costco, John Deere, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Pepsi. I could go on because there are so many more. In New York, they answer the phones at DMV call centers. In Louisiana's Angola prison, they still do farm labor by harvesting corn and soybeans and picking cotton, just like enslaved black people did 200 years ago. But Louisiana is not alone in this. Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, North Carolina, and Texas all have prison farms that house prisoners on the same land that was originally a slave plantation. Prisoners were even frontline workers during the pandemic. Nearly every state in the country benefited from prison labor during the pandemic. Incarcerated workers made masks, hand sanitizer, medical gowns, and other needed equipment. They worked in morgues, transported bodies, dug mass graves, and built coffins. They washed hospital bed sheets, towels, and hospital gowns. In California, 30% of the state's firefighting force is composed of prisoners. They fight the wildfires that rage every year in that state. The inmate firefighters make just $1 an hour. If states had to pay prisoners minimum wage, they couldn't keep operating. They go bankrupt. So when people ask me if slavery ended in 1863, I say no, it just evolved several times. It has evolved from slavery and plantations to convict leasing to sharecropping to mass incarceration.
And you know what's crazy? That the captain came and told me that my time was up in Walpole, and I told him I wasn't going anywhere. And I was in the STG block, in the gang block, and I won't mention the gangs. There was 2 different gangs in here. And he asked me, he says, Sanchez, your time is up. You gotta pack your shit and go. Sorry for using the word shit. You gotta pack your things and go. Because that's the way they talk. I said, well, why? He said, because your time is up. I said, so? He says, you gotta go. I said, I ain't going. He said, well, if you don't go, what we're gonna do, we're gonna use the extraction team and get you out of here. We throw your stuff right out the front door and throw you out the front door. I said, well, make it happen then, because I'm not going anywhere. And he pulled me to the side. He said, Sanchez, you're done with your time. I says, I ain't got nothing to do out there. I don't know the way of life. You know, it's nothing. I have nothing out there. My father is dying. My mother's dead. I don't have nobody to go to. This is all I know. I did 24 years in your system. And he felt so bad that I can see shed a tear coming out. He said, Sanchez, please, don't make me order for them to remove you. I said, well, go ahead and do it. So while in the block, I had the gang leaders come to me. And they even cried too. They said, listen, OG, you've been here long enough. It's time for you to go home. I said, but I don't know anything out there. I don't want nothing out there. This is all I know. See, this is what I'm saying. You become a product of the system. You become so institutionalized that that's the way of life for you. And so I remember that day, and it really troubles me because who in the hell wants to be in prison? You know? And